Hi everybody, Matt back with you. Hope you're okay. November 1938. Britain is kind of gripped in a paranoid state as it prepares itself for the potential outbreak of World War II. Here in Ripponden, two 21-year-old girls have set off from Barkisland to Ripponden, near Halifax. On their walk, they are suddenly attacked from behind by a man who seems to move at supernatural speeds. This was just the start of a fortnight of fear that would send Halifax into a frenzied state. This is the story of the Halifax Slasher. Wednesday, 16th of November, 1938, and two 21-year-old girls, Gertrude Watts and Mary Gledhill, had left their home in Barkisland to walk to Ripponden to an evening class at the Ripponden Technical Institute. On the way down the hill, they had passed the Fleece Inn. Outside it was a man, acting very suspiciously, but they carried on. That evening was thick fog, but they took the right-hand path down Old Bank Lane. They had no idea they'd been spotted and were being followed. They continued down the hill, but of course it was 6:30 in the evening in November, so it was very, very dark, and as you can see, even today there are no street lamps on this street. It wasn't too long before they were attacked. Both girls suddenly seemed to be coshed on the head. As they fell, they could just about make out that the man had a raincoat on, that he had some shiny buckles on his shoes, but of course they'd been knocked silly. The man seemed to disappear as quickly as he came, almost in a supernatural way is how they described it. The girls staggered to a nearby house and knocked frantically on the door. They were taken in and cared for, and the police were called. The owner of the house went out to look for the assailant, but it was too foggy to see anything. Both girls needed stitches in their head. So both girls survived the attack, but there was a lot of fear already in this area at the time. As mentioned, it was looking likely that World War II was about to break out, and it had only been 20 years since the last one, so you can only imagine how people felt that the same thing was going to happen all over again. But in the area, Halifax, Bradford, Calderdale area, in the 1920s there had been a Halifax Slasher going round attacking women and slashing their dresses. It seemed to me more that he was attacking the clothes than the people themselves. So there was a bit of paranoia as whether this was something that had started up again. Also, in 1938, a young girl, I think a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, something like that, had actually been killed in Bradford, the next, I think probably back then, town over the hill, quite brutally. That's actually an unsolved murder even today, and a story we'll probably cover on this channel another time. But it was 5 days later before events started to spiral rapidly out of control in Halifax. So from here we leave Ripponden and start the few miles walk towards Halifax, going past Sober Bridge. To get there, I'm going to go along the old, I think it's Sober Bridge to Rishworth railway line. Long since abandoned, but it's a good flat walk. So as you prepare for the horrors ahead, join me for 2 minutes as I get there. Okay, so Tom's joined us, and for some of this video we're going to head round the locations that the attacks took place across Halifax. So I've obviously already shown you Ripponden, and most of the others took place in this part of Halifax, kind of from King Cross down to Dean Clough. I think it's probably best called West Halifax. I'm not going to do every single location, and some are still further afield again, like Elland and Mythenroyd. I'll just tell you about those when we get to them. But yeah, let's see if we can actually find some of the spots from 1938. And we begin on Queen's Road, and just ahead of us on the right hand side we find the former Macintosh Chocolate Factory or Toffee Factory. Working here is Mary Sutcliffe, aged 21, who's just finished her shift. It is the 21st of November 1938, 5 days since the attacks in Ripponden. Soon she's walking along here, Francis Street, to Lister Lane, and she sees a man appear from out of the darkness and into the light of a gas lamp. He raises his arm as if to strike her, and she lifted her own to protect herself, then turned and ran. When she got home, she'd seen that her arm had been slashed with a razor. Mary claimed she'd been attacked by a man aged possibly between 25 to 35 and about 5'10" in height, with very prominent eyes. The press report referred to the attack as being done by the Slasher. 3 days later, Thursday, 24th of November, and Clayton Aspinall is on Queen's Road outside the Art College, not too far away from where Mary had been attacked 3 nights earlier. Rushing out of the darkness, arm raised and ready to strike, a man ran down from Arundel Street to attack Clayton. Clayton received injuries to his head and fingers, and the assailant once again fled into the darkness. Clayton thought the man would be about 5'9" and maybe 30 years old, and wearing a raincoat. The one item that seemed to link all the attacks so far. This attack was the one that saw the Halifax Slasher make front page news. At the time of the attack, there were 200 girls at the art college, and they were kept locked in the college for their own safety until they could be escorted home or sent home in groups. If the attacks on the victims had caused a paranoia amongst the people of Halifax, then the next night was going to bring complete terror to the people in the town, as it became known as the night of the Slasher. Saturday, 26th of November. Annie Cannon, aged 39, of High Road Well, had been to use her outside toilet. On leaving the toilet at 6:20 p.m, she was struck on the left shoulder and pushed to the ground. She screamed. The attacker was spotted running away by neighbours who looked outside. Thankfully, only her cardigan seemed damaged. Alice MacDonald was in Ovenden and spotted a man waving a handkerchief. As she got nearer, the man revealed a razor blade under that handkerchief and slashed at her throat. She fought back and attacked him with a hatpin that she had been carrying for safety. She said that she scratched his face and the attacker fled. As the police were scrambling to the scenes in Halifax, a vigilante group got in touch and said that they thought they'd spotted someone with the description of the Slasher in Sorby Bridge. So the police headed en masse to Sorby Bridge and were told that the Slasher had fled into a mill down in the town. It surrounded the mill, but nobody was spotted. The third attack of the night was on 38-year-old Percy Waddington. He worked at the Elland Road Co-op as the manager. I'm not going to go to Elland today because I'm not sure if the co-op still exists either. He'd been to the pub and then went to get some fish and chips about 9:55 p.m. A little while later was banging on the door of a Mrs. Holden. She opened the door. Percy was clutching his left arm. It had been slashed. He still had hold of his fish and chips, but what he also had in his left arm was a piece of fabric, and it was a piece of fabric that he had ripped from his attacker on the raincoat. He'd pulled at the attacker and the fabric of the raincoat was there. So now they were looking for a slasher with a damaged raincoat. But it was only 5 minutes later, and miles apart, 10 p.m, another attack took place. Percy, though, couldn't describe his attacker, but took the police to the scene where they found blood and a razor blade. Green Lane was somewhere in this location between Martin's Mill and the Running Man pub, and at 10 o'clock, Mrs. Hilda Lodge, who also had a fish and chip supper to enjoy, was attacked by an arm in the darkness, slashing her face and arm.
Police turned up at Hilda's house, but to a riotous scene, as an angry mob had hold of a man that they thought was the slasher. Shouts were ringing out, "They've got him! Kill the bastard! Break his bloody neck!" The man was Clifford George Edwards, who was actually one of the men patrolling the area near Hilda's house, and the crowd had just presumed he was the attacker. The police pulled the man away from the angry crowd to safety. The night of the slasher may have been over, but the terror was yet to reach its peak.
The police decided that whoever the attacker was, he must be local, because otherwise how could he escape so quickly down these completely dark alleyways and streets in the kind of depths of Halifax that would have been unknown to anybody else. The local people also thought this must be the case. They set up vigilante groups. So whilst the police were searching, groups of people also went out to search as well. But of course this would cause some problems. There was no official description of who the attacker was, other than things like he was about 5'10", he was a 30-odd-year-old man, he had buckles on his shoes and this raincoat. And basically, anybody who was out alone in one of those items suddenly became a target.
The next morning, more reports of attacks the previous night. A 21-year-old Leslie Nichols, who was a baker, had been attacked, but they'd only cut his apron at around 7:30. And about 11:30 p.m, Margaret Reynolds at Caddyfield says she came face to face with the slasher, slicing her down both arms. Her description saw the slasher become a gruesome Victorian-era maniac.
Perhaps unsurprisingly, both the press and the public began to say that Jack the Ripper had come to Halifax. Jack was the notorious murderer from London town. But nobody was actually being killed. These seemed like almost pranks, that somebody was running up, slashing at somebody and running away. And it was always said that they escaped at an almost supernatural pace. This to me suggests somebody else. This sounds more like another notorious London criminal of Spring-Heeled Jack, who used to appear, attack people, and then leap massive distances and across the roofs and disappear. He was a character, I think, before Jack the Ripper, and lasted longer than Jack the Ripper. There were decades of reports of Spring-Heeled Jack attacks. And Spring-Heeled Jack is somebody I'm hoping that one day we'll cover on the channel, but I'll do that in London. So, what exactly was happening? Who was this character? What were the police piecing together? Well, it seemed like nothing at all. So Scotland Yard appeared on the scene.
Sunday the 26th. 19-year-old Beatrice Sorrell is walking down Gibbet Street to Pelham Lane, next to the location of the notorious gibbet is Bedford Street North. She also saw that waving handkerchief before being slashed. She ran to the fire station nearby. It was noted by the fire officers that Beatrice wasn't out of breath, seemed particularly nonplussed about the attack, not upset or panicked about the situation she'd just been in. The next report that evening came from Lily Woodhead, 21 years old, at 10 p.m, but in Mytholmroyd. Walking down Twine Lane to catch a bus, someone jumped over a wall in front of her, slashed at her, and then leapt back over the wall. The next report came from Skirket Green. Fred Baldwin, aged just 15, was heading down the road to Copley. He was suddenly surrounded by 50 people attacking him after someone had said, "That's him." He escaped, but he was badly beaten, as was the boy who shouted, "That's him," who went to apologise to Fred's father, who punched his lights out. The mood of Halifax had changed. Shops were closed. Warnings were sent out to not head out at night. The police now claimed that potentially there were 3 Halifax slashers. On the Monday, the next victim, Constance Wood, left Longlover Lane to head to work. Despite a heavy presence of police and vigilantes on the street, she found herself attacked by the slasher. The people living on Longlover Lane had claimed of seeing a stranger hanging about recently, looking through windows and trying door handles. Such was the paranoia and fear in town that every man was under suspicion. The random and frequent attacks meant it was likely only a matter of time before the slasher struck again. A potential breakthrough with the case happened around this time when a raincoat with a part ripped off the left arm was found on a playing field in Elland. The raincoat matched the piece of fabric that Percy Waddington had ripped off his attacker. By Tuesday, the 29th, it was decided that this case had overwhelmed the Halifax police force. It was out of their hands and Scotland Yard were called in. At the same time, there seemed to be kind of copycat attacks happening, razor blade slashings across the country, Manchester and Leeds, and even as far as Glasgow. A very, very scary report said that a school had taken 20 razor blades off boys in that school who had gone into school and slashed at girls pretending to be a Halifax Slasher. These copycat things were getting way out of control, and the attacks still carried on. Mary Sutcliffe, the first person attacked in Halifax, was in her yard on Allerton Street and was suddenly slashed across the chest. The second time she had been attacked. The randomness of the slasher attacks was now questioned. Was the slasher coming back to have another go at all the victims? 17-year-old Winnie McCall was the next victim. She was slashed on the forehead. And then Mrs. Margaret Kenny was attacked at Dean Clough on the steps just here. Margaret apparently gave as good as he got and attacked the slasher back. But once again, the slasher escaped at supernatural speeds.
Just 2 days later, the slasher story took its final twist. In the Evening Courier, the Halifax Courier, they posted a picture of the raincoat that had been found. And somebody came forward and said that they recognised the raincoat, that it actually belonged to Percy Waddington. The police went to question Percy Waddington again, and he quickly admitted that he had attacked himself and ripped his own raincoat. And he was just the first. What suddenly followed came as a spiral of these victims suddenly announcing that they were responsible for what had happened to themselves.
After Percy Waddington had immediately admitted that he himself had slashed his hand and created the whole scenario, the other victims were interviewed. The confessions came thick and fast. Beatrice Sorrell, Winifred McCall, Leslie Nichol all confessed to causing the injuries on themselves. All of those who confessed soon found themselves in court. Percy was bound over for 3 years, but kept his job. Winifred McCall, Leslie Nichols, Beatrice Sorrell, Hilda Lodge all pleaded guilty. Annie Cannon was also in court. She pleaded not guilty, due to the effect that their actions had had on the town itself. They were sentenced to 4 weeks in prison. Annie, however, was found not guilty after statement tampering. However, a mob smashed up her windows of her house. Lily Woodhead from Mytholmroyd was also found guilty at a later trial and was bound over for 2 years. The other Halifax victims were not charged for their actions, but the only attacks that were considered real were the original ones on the 2 girls in Ripponden. No other charges were brought. The only question that remained: why?
So that was the end of the story of the slasher, and Halifax got back to normal for at least a little while before, in less than a year, World War II broke out. Now, of course, one thing it's quite difficult to do is to unpack exactly what was going on in those 2 weeks. We talked earlier on about there was paranoia about potential outbreak of war, which obviously did happen, and there was paranoia about there had been previous slasher attacks a few years before, and there'd been just before the first slasher victims a murder over in Bradford as well. So things had been happening, but what brings a mass of people to this, mass hysteria essentially? It's very tricky to sum up what would have been going through people's minds. What do you think?
I don't know. I really don't.
I mean, it's tricky, isn't it?
It's like TikTok. It's like, but some of the photographs of the women and the victims in the newspaper. I only saw 2 pictures of some, but one of them looks like she's won the pool. She's smiling. Not how they paint victims in newspapers now. And I wonder if the media sort of had cottoned on by that point as to whether that it was all of this.
So the victims basically all knew that they would be in the paper, they would get attention. Was it purely attention seeking? I think we know 2 or 3 of them possibly had some kind of mental health issues going on. Nerves was mentioned quite a lot. And yeah, your mind can play tricks on you. It really can. I suffer from anxiety. I've never shied away from that. And when I get anxiety, I get 1,000 wrong scenarios in my head for something. Obviously, it wouldn't make me.
You've never gone and bought a razor.
No.
Cut your clothes and yourself
and said I'd been
it
attacked.
was me.
No. But that's what I mean in terms of.
Thank goodness.
You know, if there's a mass anxiety, if everybody's feeling that. Yeah, it's a strange one. It's a strange one.
The lady that attaches over the comb on her forehead, I find that very.
Yeah. I suppose the other question we've got to ask is, was there ever actually a Halifax Slasher? The police said no, but only half of the people who got attacked were either sent to jail or bound over or charged. The other half weren't even questioned again, which I think is quite interesting. And even they literally just went, by the 2nd of December, there was no such thing as a slasher, and that was it. And what happened with those other people? And I think the first people who got attacked in Ripponden are likely the ones. So they were attacked. I'm sure they were attacked, and they always claimed they were as well. Didn't they?
They did claim that they were, but they wanted to. By that point, they tried to hide their name.
Yeah. So yeah, I'd love to know what you think of this one. It is a bizarre story. I know there are other people have tried summing this up in different ways. I've not gone down the this is what this person said, this is what this person said. If you want to see what other people think of it, go for their books and things. That's just my thought. I think your mind can play tricks. Your mind believes what it wants to believe. And when there's that air of paranoia where you're not sure if your neighbour is a friend or foe, build that up a bit. Yeah.
I think that Bruce Springsteen song, The River, is a dream alive, it don't come true, or is it something worse?
Who knew we'd get Brucey in there? Of course. Okay. We will see you for the next video. If you celebrate Easter, happy Easter, or if you're just having a break, have a lovely break. And we will see you very soon for the next video. Take care.